Context for learning. So the setting of this lesson segment will take place in a language arts small group class. The curriculum that I used is a curriculum that's centered around the book The Giver. The behavior management plan for this class is that there is a set expectations that they came up with as a class together. So the expectation of following directions is one of them, staying on task is another, and staying off your phone is the third expectations that they came up with as a class, and that's on a whiteboard, and you can't see that on the camera, but it's on a whiteboard on the side of the classroom. So that's the behavior management system that's taken in place in this class. Describe any special circumstances that will allow your observer to understand your instructional decisions. There were a couple different things that took into effect when I made my instructional decisions. I thought about the variety of ability levels in this class. There are students that are fairly low functioning and that are actually a part of our life skills program at our school. And there are some higher functioning students that could actually be out in the mainstream. So when planning my instructions, I took into effect what are some high level learning and low level learning questions. There is also a student in my class that gets up and walks out of class for a break unprompted, but he has an EA that will follow him, and usually he'll like whisper it to his EA. Sometimes he does, sometimes he doesn't. It's kind of between him and his EA. There's another student that struggles with answering questions. He has social anxiety and struggles to find the words in fear of being wrong or not understanding the question. So I might prompt him with a question and he won't answer. So that's something that I took into consideration when coming up with my questions. Baseline data. So I observed the class and saw who struggled with finding the main idea and identifying the main idea prior to teaching this learning segment. And then I also utilized the data sheets that the teacher had been using for progress monitoring purposes. I noticed that 3 of the 5 students in the class had objectives relating to main idea. So that's why I chose teaching the main idea for my learning segment. So 2 students of the 3 had 60% accuracy in identifying the main idea, and 1 student had 40% accuracy in identifying the main idea. So when I made my goal, I based it off the students that this was their objective. So that was a 3 out of 5 that I wanted to get, and I wanted them to understand what the main idea was. Learning segment information. So the subject area that I'm teaching is language arts reading. The topic that we're focusing on is main idea with the book The Giver. The targeted Common Core standard is 9.4.2.2. So this is a 9th and 10th grade standard. So determine excuse me, a theme or essential idea of the text and analyze it in detail. Its development over the course of the text, including how it emerges and shapes and refines by specific details provided an objective summary of the text, so summarizing and finding those main ideas using details. Now, as I stated before, there's 3 students in this language arts class with objectives for main idea. So one student, given a reading prompt, he will identify the main idea or theme of the text 70% of the time. The second one is given a grade level reading passage. She will identify the theme or central idea of the text. And then the third is given an instructional level reading probe. He will identify the main idea of the text 70% of the time as measured by a special ed teacher. So these are the 3 objectives that I focused on while developing this learning segment. So my summative assessment, what I want the students to understand after this learning segment is they'll be able to summarize chapters 7 through 9. Then lesson 1, measurable objective, is the students will be able to identify the main idea of chapter 7 with 3 out of 5 students being accurate. Lesson 2, students will be able to identify the main idea of chapter 8 with 3 out of 5 students being accurate. And lesson 3, students will be able to summarize the last 3 chapters with 3 out of 5 students being accurate. So those objectives build on each other. They're learning about the main ideas from each chapter, and then the third lesson objective is the summative assessment and determining and summarizing the past 3 chapters that they read. Lesson sequence. So when developing my lesson sequence for this learning segment, I considered my prior knowledge of what the students knew about main idea. When sequencing these lessons, I thought about strategies that I've used in prior classes and with other students. So I really wanted to utilize the study guides, because these were the key details and the clues that would help them identify the main idea. So when developing the scope and sequence, I wanted 2 days where we really focus in on those main ideas. We use those questions to focus on only one chapter at a time. And then the 3rd day, where the summative assessment, I wanted them to be able to summarize all 3 of the chapters and really connect those dots on how the story is moving along. Communication skills. So the students will need to be able to identify how to communicate what their main idea is in their own words, and being able to summarize what happened in the chapter and in the past 3 chapters instead of repeating just key details. So how I'm going to support this is I will assist the students that are struggling. I'll prompt them with use the key details that we use for our study guide. These are the key details that we have. Then I'm going to assess my students by looking over their exit slips each day and seeing if they're struggling or not. I'm also going to assess them by asking them the study guide questions and during that guided practice that we have, and seeing if they're understanding what's going on. And that's also how I'm going to be collecting my data. I'm going to be collecting my data through the exit slips and through the study guide questions. Prior learning. So I'm going to use the students' prior learning of what a main idea is and how to identify the main idea in my learning segment. And then I'm also going to have them connect the new main idea to the previous chapter's main idea. Therefore, the students can see how the story is moving along rather than just seeing that one chapter at a time. So self-directed learning strategies. So I'm going to have the students come up with their own main ideas and their own answers and how to identify them with the main idea by just utilizing those key questions. So that's how I'm going to self-direct that student learning. And I'm also going to provide plenty of opportunities for them to find the answers and to answer the study guide questions in my guided practice. Progress monitoring data. So I plan on monitoring my students' progress by how they answer the study guides questions. So those are kind of my formative assessments. And then I also seen how they answer the chapter 8 is about, chapter 7 is about exit slips. And then describe how you plan on displaying the progress for this learning segment. So I plan on telling my students after they turn in their exit slip what the main idea is, and we kind of come up with that as a class. Then I also plan on displaying it as what's going to happen for the next day. So if the students are really getting it, then I won't focus on it as much. Supports and differentiation. So I'm going to utilize my students' strengths and interests and preferences into my learning segment by making the lessons as interactive as possible. I'm going to have the students answer the questions first before I answer them, or I'm going to prompt them to answer them first. I'm going to have them use the text to try to find the answers before we share it as a class. And then I'm also going to make it interactive by having a variety of ways that the students can answer. So one day I'm going to have the students come up to the smartboard and write it down on the smartboard if they have the answer. And then another day I'm going to have them just write it verbally. And then I'm going to have them write it on an individual whiteboard. So I'm going to provide a couple different ways for them to interact and answer the study guide questions before they write it down in their packet. Some accommodations and modifications that I took into effect when planning this lesson and thinking about how I'm going to assess my students is some of the students in their IEPs have an adaptation that they can dictate their answers because they don't like writing, maybe writing hurts their hand. So I'm going to allow them to tell me the main idea if they choose that option. So engagement. How am I going to actively engage my students? So I am going to engage my students by asking questions and keeping the lesson going, engaging and asking those in-depth questions and moving along with the study guide, having them follow along with the text and keeping them engaged. Really providing that positive support that is necessary. And then feedback. How I'm going to provide feedback is repeating their answer, what they just said, and reassuring the students that the answer is correct. I am also going to, if the answer is incorrect, I'm going to try to guide them to the correct answer. Maybe I'll ask the students if they want to phone a friend or something like that. So the other students can kind of help out that student if they're struggling with finding the answer. And then how I'm going to promote maintenance and generalization is we're going to be practicing the skill each and every day. We're going to be able to identify the main idea each day. And then I want the students, so in my preview I always say, well, what is the main idea? So I want to promote that generalization that this is how we know what the chapter is about. It's not about just the giver and what that is. So describe the theory and research-based practices. So the learning theory that has been informed with planning my decisions, and the research-based practices I'm using during this license segment. So I'm using the model we do and then you do. So that 3-step process. I'm doing that because I want to be able to model finding those key details, utilizing those key details, and then I want us to answer the study guide questions on our own, and then I want them to come up with their main idea. So utilizing those key details in the we do in the guided practice is going to support them with the main idea.